The Princess of Wales has made an emotional appearance at a Manchester cancer centre, giving a rare insight into her own treatment. Kate Middleton met with nurses and patients undergoing chemotherapy and shared a special moment with one mum who has beaten the disease.
Something unexpected happened in the royal spotlight, and millions could see it unfolding in real time. As Catherine stepped into an increasingly prominent role, many began wondering whether a quiet shift in influence was taking place behind palace walls. While Camilla remained an important figure, public attention appeared to move elsewhere, sparking debate among royal watchers and commentators alike. But was this simply changing public perception, or evidence of something much bigger happening inside the monarchy? So, what do you think? Is Catherine already becoming the monarchy's most influential figure? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Spotlight turns toward Catherine. Suddenly, crowds arrived expecting another familiar royal appearance, the kind that usually follows a predictable pattern. Cameras lined the streets, and reporters prepared their notes. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Yet as the event unfolded, attention began moving in a direction few had anticipated. Instead of focusing on Queen Camilla, much of the conversation quickly centered on Catherine, Princess of Wales. The shift was subtle at first. News photographers appeared increasingly drawn to Catherine's arrival, her interactions with the public, and the confidence she projected throughout the engagement. Television broadcasts lingered on her presence longer than many observers expected. Online clips featuring her moments from the event began spreading rapidly, attracting views, comments, and debate at a pace that surprised even experienced royal watchers. What made the moment particularly interesting was that it did not emerge from any formal announcement or dramatic confrontation. There was no public dispute, no official change in rank, and no statement suggesting that Catherine's role had suddenly expanded. Nevertheless, public reaction created its own story. Across social media platforms, discussion increasingly focused on what Catherine represented rather than simply what she was doing. Supporters praised her composure, while others argued that the attention reflected growing expectations about the monarchy's future. As those conversations intensified, comparisons inevitably followed. Commentators began examining the different positions occupied by Catherine and Camilla within the royal family. Camilla remained queen and continued carrying out important responsibilities. Yet many viewers appeared more interested in the figure they believed would help shape the next chapter of the monarchy. Whether fair or not, that perception influenced the way the event was covered and discussed. The growing fascination with Catherine raised larger questions. Was the public simply responding to a popular royal figure, or were they witnessing the early signs of a broader shift in influence? Some analysts suggested that Catherine had gradually become one of the monarchy's most effective public representatives. Others cautioned against reading too much into a single appearance, arguing that media attention often fluctuates and does not necessarily reflect real institutional power. Even so, the numbers were difficult to ignore. Articles highlighting Catherine's role attracted significant engagement. Images of her appearance circulated widely. Television panels returned repeatedly to the same subject, discussing not only what happened during the event, but what it might indicate about changing public sentiment. In contrast, Camilla's presence seemed to generate far less excitement, despite her senior position. By the end of the day, the event itself almost felt secondary to the reaction surrounding it. What began as a routine royal engagement had evolved into a conversation about visibility, influence, and perception. No official line had been crossed, and no authority had formally changed hands. Yet millions had witnessed something that felt significant. Whether it marked the beginning of a transformation or merely a powerful moment of public attention remained unclear. What was becoming harder to dismiss, however, was the growing sense that Catherine occupied the center of the royal narrative in a way that few could ignore. Why is Catherine suddenly commanding more attention than Camilla at an event meant to be routine? And who is quietly losing influence behind the scenes? And why are insiders suddenly watching every move as something unspoken begins shifting inside the palace walls? Let's unravel the details. Visibility becomes a different power. What made the growing attention around Catherine so remarkable was that it did not seem tied to a single event. Instead, it appeared to be developing steadily over time, almost quietly, until many people suddenly realized how much her role seemed to have changed. There had been no major announcement from Buckingham Palace declaring a new position or expanded authority. Yet across the royal calendar, signs of increasing responsibility were becoming difficult to ignore. More frequently, Catherine was appearing alone at important engagements. These were not routine appearances designed simply to generate photographs or headlines. Many involved causes, organizations, and initiatives carrying significant public importance. Each appearance placed her directly before audiences without the immediate support of Prince William or other senior members of the royal family. With every engagement, she appeared increasingly comfortable operating as a leading figure in her own right. At the same time, her presence on the international stage appeared to be expanding. Diplomatic events, cultural initiatives, and high-profile meetings increasingly placed Catherine at the center of public attention. Royal observers noted that she was often representing values and priorities closely associated with the future direction of the monarchy. While such responsibilities were not unusual for a Princess of Wales, the scale and consistency of her involvement led some commentators to wonder whether something larger was taking shape. The discussion was not necessarily about formal power. In constitutional terms, nothing had changed. Camilla remained queen, and the established hierarchy of the royal family remained intact. Yet influence inside a modern monarchy is often measured differently. Public trust, media attention, and symbolic leadership can become powerful forms of authority. In that environment, Catherine appeared to be gaining momentum. Coverage of her activities reflected that shift. Reports increasingly focused not only on what she was doing, but also on what she represented. Journalists frequently described her as a stabilizing figure. Supporters pointed to her years of careful preparation, arguing that she had gradually earned a unique level of public confidence. Critics, however, questioned whether the media was placing too much emphasis on future possibilities rather than present realities. The debate itself only fueled greater interest. As attention intensified, comparisons with Camilla became unavoidable. There was no open rivalry and no public disagreement. Yet public perception often creates contrasts where none officially exist. While Camilla continued fulfilling her responsibilities, Catherine seemed to occupy a growing share of the conversation surrounding the monarchy's future. Every new engagement appeared to strengthen that impression. Some analysts viewed the development as a natural consequence of succession planning. Others suspected it reflected changing public expectations. The monarchy has always depended heavily on symbolism, and symbols can evolve long before official structures do. That possibility added another layer of intrigue to what might otherwise have seemed like routine royal appearances. By this stage, the discussion was no longer focused solely on Catherine's popularity. Instead, questions were emerging about influence, visibility, and preparation for what comes next. Without any formal declaration, she appeared to be stepping into a space that millions increasingly associated with leadership, and that perception was beginning to reshape the wider royal narrative itself. Observers noted subtle shifts in tone, protocol, and media framing that suggested something larger was unfolding beneath the surface, even if no one within the palace would openly confirm it. That silence only deepened speculation about what was truly being prepared next behind scenes. Catherine moves through duties that seem to exceed her official role. But what is really being set in motion behind closed doors? Is this gradual elevation accidental or carefully designed from above? And who stands to benefit when everything finally comes to light? Let's find out. Attention shifts as questions grow. As Catherine's public profile continued to rise, another development was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The conversation surrounding Queen Camilla seemed to be growing quieter. Nothing dramatic had happened. There had been no announcement, no controversy, and no visible change to her official role. Yet across television broadcasts, newspaper headlines, and online discussions, the balance of attention appeared to be moving in a different direction. More and more, Catherine was becoming the figure people wanted to watch. At first, the contrast was subtle. Coverage of royal engagements still included both women, and both continued carrying out their responsibilities. However, the way those events were reported began to change. Stories that might once have focused primarily on Camilla increasingly highlighted Catherine's presence, her activities, and her influence. Photographs featuring Catherine often received greater prominence. Headlines frequently placed her name first. Even when attending the same royal functions, public discussion seemed to follow her rather than anyone else. The shift was not necessarily about status. Camilla remained queen, holding a position that carried undeniable importance within the royal family. Catherine, despite her growing visibility, remained Princess of Wales. Yet public interest does not always follow official hierarchy. Sometimes it follows expectation, emotion, and the sense that a particular figure represents the future. That dynamic appeared to be influencing how many people viewed the monarchy. Royal commentators soon began noticing the pattern. Discussions emerged about whether public priorities were changing. Some observers argued that Catherine's growing popularity naturally attracted greater attention. Others believed something more significant was taking place. They pointed to the consistency of the trend, noting that Catherine's visibility was not limited to one successful appearance or a temporary wave of positive coverage. Instead, it seemed to be building steadily across multiple engagements and public appearances. As those conversations spread, comparisons between Catherine and Camilla became increasingly common. Supporters of the monarchy debated what the contrast might mean. Was Catherine simply benefiting from public enthusiasm, or was she gradually becoming the central figure around whom the institution was being viewed? The question carried weight because it touched on something larger than individual popularity. It raised the possibility that perceptions of leadership inside the royal family were beginning to evolve. Not everyone agreed with that interpretation. Some analysts warned against drawing major conclusions from media trends. Public attention can be unpredictable, and headlines often reflect audience demand rather than institutional reality. From this perspective, the growing focus on Catherine did not necessarily indicate a shift in influence. It might simply reflect curiosity about the future. Yet even that explanation highlighted the same underlying fact. People were increasingly looking toward Catherine. The more attention moved in her direction, the more noticeable Camilla's reduced visibility became. There was no sign of conflict, but there was a growing contrast that few observers could ignore. One senior royal woman appeared to be gaining momentum, while another seemed to be fading from the center of the conversation. Whether intentional or entirely organic, that perception was beginning to shape how millions understood the monarchy, setting the stage for even larger questions about where its future focus might ultimately rest. As media attention shifts quietly inside the palace, is something deeper unfolding between the two most powerful royal women, or is this only the beginning of a controlled narrative shift, and who truly benefits as the spotlight drifts away? Stay with us. Signals of change grow stronger. By this stage, the conversation surrounding Catherine was no longer being driven solely by public enthusiasm or media fascination. Something else appeared to be happening. The signs were subtle, scattered across official appearances, public communications, and royal engagements, but together they began forming a pattern that many observers found difficult to dismiss. Increasingly, it seemed as though Catherine was not simply benefiting from attention. She was becoming central to how the monarchy presented itself. One of the first clues appeared in official messaging. Royal communications that once distributed attention more evenly seemed to feature Catherine with increasing prominence. Whether through photographs, announcements, or coverage of key engagements, her presence appeared more visible than before. None of this represented a formal change in position, yet symbolism has always carried enormous weight within the monarchy. Those who closely follow royal affairs understand that visibility is rarely accidental. At the same time, Catherine's placement at major events attracted growing attention. She was frequently positioned at the forefront of important occasions, standing in roles that naturally drew public focus. These appearances were not isolated incidents. They occurred repeatedly enough to raise questions among commentators and royal analysts. Some began wondering whether palace officials were responding to Catherine's growing popularity by giving her a more prominent platform. Others believed the process might be more deliberate than that. The international dimension made the situation even more interesting. Catherine increasingly found herself representing the monarchy beyond Britain's borders. Through diplomatic meetings, charitable initiatives, and high-profile visits, she became one of the royal family's most recognizable global figures. Each appearance strengthened her image as someone capable of connecting with audiences both at home and abroad. For supporters, this demonstrated experience and preparation. For critics, it invited speculation about whether expectations were quietly shifting. Meanwhile, discussions surrounding Camilla continued to fade into the background. She remained queen and continued performing her responsibilities, yet public attention seemed increasingly directed elsewhere. The contrast became difficult to ignore. Reports about royal events often generated conversations centered on Catherine, even when multiple senior royals were present. This growing imbalance encouraged further debate about what it might reveal regarding the monarchy's future priorities. Analysts soon focused on another important factor: symbolism. Royal institutions often communicate through gestures, appearances, and positioning rather than explicit statements. Because of this, even seemingly small decisions can carry larger meaning. When Catherine repeatedly occupied highly visible roles, some observers interpreted it as evidence that palace officials recognized her growing influence. Others argued that such interpretations risked reading too much into routine planning. Yet the debate itself reflected how much attention her role was attracting. As these developments continued, the narrative surrounding Catherine evolved. The question was no longer whether she was popular. That had already become clear. The deeper question was whether important figures within the institution were beginning to adapt to that reality. No official declaration confirmed such a shift, and no palace source openly acknowledged it. Nevertheless, the accumulation of signs created a powerful impression. The monarchy appeared increasingly comfortable placing Catherine at the center of its public image, a development that suggested her influence might be extending beyond perception and moving into something far more significant. What is really happening inside the palace as Catherine's presence grows in ways few expected? Who is quietly shifting the balance of power behind closed doors? And what are they not telling the public? And how far has this transformation already gone unnoticed? Keep watching. Future plans begin taking shape. As Catherine's visibility continued to grow, the conversation surrounding her role entered a new phase. It was no longer simply about popularity, favorable headlines, or successful public appearances. Increasingly, attention turned toward what her growing prominence might mean for the monarchy's future. Without any formal announcement, many observers began sensing that the public was being introduced to a longer-term vision, one carefully shaped through appearances, messaging, and symbolism, rather than direct statements. The shift became noticeable through the themes that increasingly surrounded Catherine's public work. Coverage often emphasized stability, continuity, and the future of the institution. Whether attending charitable engagements, representing royal causes, or participating in major public events, she frequently appeared connected to discussions about where the monarchy was heading rather than where it had been. The distinction was subtle but important. Catherine was no longer viewed only as a senior royal carrying out duties. She was increasingly seen as a figure linked to the monarchy's next chapter. This growing association did not emerge overnight. For years, Catherine had maintained a careful public image, avoiding unnecessary controversy while steadily building relationships with charities, organizations, and communities across Britain and beyond. That consistency now appeared to be paying dividends. Public trust in her seemed strong, and commentators frequently pointed to her ability to connect with audiences across different generations. As a result, discussions about the future increasingly included her name at the center. At the same time, comparisons with previous royal transitions began appearing more frequently. Historians and royal analysts examined how the monarchy had prepared the public for change during earlier eras. In many cases, future leaders gradually assumed greater visibility long before their formal responsibilities changed. Some observers saw similarities in Catherine's rising profile. They argued that the institution often relies on familiarity and public confidence, making gradual transitions more effective than sudden ones. Others viewed the situation differently. They cautioned that public perception does not necessarily reflect internal planning. From this perspective, Catherine's growing prominence could simply be a natural consequence of her popularity and position as Princess of Wales. Yet even those who rejected broader interpretations acknowledged one important reality. Conversations about the monarchy's future increasingly revolved around her. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla remained an important part of the institution, continuing her responsibilities and maintaining her official role. However, public discussion appeared increasingly future-focused rather than present-focused. That distinction subtly altered the balance of attention. While Camilla represented the monarchy as it currently existed, many people seemed drawn toward the figures they believed would define its next era. The result was a growing connection between visibility and influence. In royal institutions, influence is not always measured by official titles alone. Public confidence, symbolic importance, and sustained attention can become powerful forms of authority in their own right. Catherine appeared to be benefiting from all three. Whether planned or entirely organic, the trend suggested that her role was evolving beyond public popularity and into something more consequential. As that perception strengthened, it became increasingly difficult to separate discussions about Catherine from broader questions concerning the monarchy's future direction and long-term identity. As the palace carefully reshapes its future behind closed doors, what is really being prepared in plain sight? Who is being positioned for the next era? And what signals are being quietly sent to the public? And how long before everything becomes impossible to hide? Stay tuned. One event changed everything overnight. The moment that transformed the entire conversation did not arrive with a dramatic announcement or a major constitutional development. Instead, it emerged from a public event that, on the surface, appeared routine. Senior royals attended, official duties were carried out, and the monarchy continued presenting its familiar image of stability. Yet by the time the event ended, something unexpected had happened. The story was no longer about the event itself. It was about Catherine. From the earliest moments of coverage, attention seemed unusually concentrated on the Princess of Wales. Cameras followed her movements closely. News reports highlighted her role. Images featuring Catherine quickly dominated newspaper websites and social media platforms. What began as standard reporting gradually evolved into something much larger. Across television broadcasts and digital media, she became the central focus of the day's narrative. The development caught the attention of royal watchers because it differed from the usual pattern. Major royal events typically distribute attention across multiple senior figures. However, this time, Catherine appeared to command a level of interest that overshadowed nearly everyone else. Headlines increasingly emphasized her presence, her actions, and her significance. Even stories that included several members of the royal family often placed her at the center. As coverage expanded internationally, the effect became even more noticeable. Media organizations outside Britain picked up the story and amplified the growing fascination surrounding Catherine. Articles examining her influence, her popularity, and her future role appeared across international outlets. Discussions that began domestically quickly spread to audiences around the world. In many cases, Catherine was presented not simply as a senior royal, but as one of the defining figures of the monarchy's next era. The contrast with Queen Camilla became increasingly apparent. Camilla continued fulfilling her duties and maintained her position within the royal family. Yet much of the public conversation appeared to move past her and toward Catherine. There was no official conflict between the two women, but perception was creating a visible distinction. One figure seemed connected to the present structure of the monarchy, while the other appeared increasingly associated with its future. Perhaps the most significant development came from commentators who had spent decades covering the royal family. These were not casual observers reacting to a temporary trend. Many had witnessed multiple royal transitions and understood how public sentiment can evolve over time. When several of these experienced voices began acknowledging a noticeable shift in attention, the discussion gained additional credibility. They did not necessarily agree on what the change meant, but many agreed that something had changed. Interpretations varied widely. Some believed Catherine's growing prominence reflected genuine public admiration, earned through years of consistent work. Others wondered whether palace officials were becoming more comfortable placing her at the forefront of the monarchy's public image. A few cautioned that media enthusiasm should not be confused with institutional power. Yet regardless of perspective, the underlying reality remained difficult to ignore. By the end of the event, the balance of attention had shifted so dramatically that even skeptics struggled to dismiss it. What seemed impossible only months earlier now appeared increasingly plausible. Catherine was no longer simply attracting attention within the royal family. She was becoming the figure through whom millions were beginning to interpret the monarchy itself. And that realization carried implications far beyond a single day. Something shifted during the event, but was it planned or completely accidental? How did Catherine suddenly become the center of global attention, and what are insiders refusing to admit? And if this is only the beginning, what comes next for the entire royal balance? Stay glued. Power settles into new shape. By the final stage of this unfolding situation, the atmosphere surrounding the monarchy had shifted into something more permanent in appearance. What began as gradual changes in visibility and attention now seemed to form a clearer pattern. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was no longer just a central public figure within the royal family. She had become the reference point through which much of the institution's modern identity was being viewed. The change was not announced, and it was never formally declared. Yet it was becoming increasingly visible through how people responded to her presence. In contrast, Queen Camilla's position remained officially unchanged. She continued her role, maintained her responsibilities, and represented continuity within the monarchy. However, the way her presence was discussed and perceived appeared different compared to earlier periods. She was still part of the institution's core structure, but she was no longer occupying the same level of public attention that once surrounded senior royal figures by default. The shift was not about removal or replacement, but about focus gradually moving elsewhere. Catherine's rising prominence now carried a different meaning. It was no longer only about popularity or media interest. Increasingly, her role appeared connected to how the monarchy presented itself in a broader sense. Public expectations, media narratives, and institutional messaging all seemed to align more frequently around her image. This alignment created the impression that she was not just participating in royal duties, but increasingly shaping the tone in which those duties were understood. Observers noted that this development did not occur through sudden change or visible confrontation. Instead, it unfolded through repeated patterns of visibility. Catherine was present in moments that carried symbolic weight. Her appearances often received stronger engagement. coverage frequently positioned her as a central figure, even when multiple senior royals were involved. Over time, these repeated signals created a perception that extended beyond individual events and into a broader narrative about direction and leadership. At the same time, palace strategy appeared to reflect this shift in subtle ways. Official communication increasingly highlighted continuity through Catherine's presence. Public engagements often placed her in positions that naturally attracted attention. Without any formal statement, the structure of visibility within the monarchy seemed to adjust itself around her growing prominence. Whether intentional or simply responsive to public interest remained unclear, but the outcome was increasingly noticeable. Interpretations of this development varied. Some viewed it as a natural evolution based on public trust and long-term preparation. Others suggested it reflected a deeper adjustment within the monarchy as it adapted to changing expectations. A more cautious view argued that visibility does not always equal authority, and that formal roles remained unchanged despite public perception. Yet even those skeptical interpretations could not fully dismiss the consistency of the trend. By this stage, Catherine's influence appeared to exist in a space between perception and structure. She was not replacing established authority, nor was she formally redefining it. Instead, she was becoming the figure around whom attention, expectation, and interpretation increasingly gathered. Camilla's role remained intact, but the center of gravity had subtly shifted. And as that shift became harder to ignore, it raised a lingering question about whether the monarchy was simply reflecting public focus or quietly adapting itself around it. So, what do you think? Has Catherine already taken control of the narrative while Camilla is being pushed aside by public opinion? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more royal news.